Greetings and salutations, fellow questioners. It is Jason McLean questions everything, and of course, I'm here with with Donnie Cho. I'm the
Hello.
aforementioned Mr. McLean, and my sidekick, as usual, is here, and we've got an interesting one. It's kind of a personal one for me, right? I grew up listening to Rush Limbaugh. My father died of cancer just before Rush passed. There was a lot going on there. But this one is very personal. I haven't talked about it for literally a year and a half. This is something I sort of developed and I've believed it, but I didn't think it was necessarily ready for public consumption until now. So we're going to do what I call the Rush Limbaugh prophecy, and Donnie is going to sort of interview me after I'm done and sort of clarify some things and go over some ideas and some concepts. Because in a lot of ways, if you've looked at our previous episodes on, is Elon Musk a Rahab of Jericho? Will millennials save us? I've alluded to this specific prophetic event. And I do think that in many ways it has set the tone for how I'm viewing the time period that we're in right now, right? Not the macro where we are in regards to the book of Revelation or anything like that, but I mean, specifically within America, within our current modern cultural context. I think once we're done with this, you'll understand more about where we're coming from and why I actually have some optimism for where we're going. I know it's really easy to look at the chaos that we have and say, there's no hope here. I beg to differ. And hopefully you'll understand why when we're done talking about it. So it was a few months after Rush Limbaugh had passed, and I was in the car. I was on lunch. I was running over to Whataburger. I remember where I was. And they had brought his wife on, and Bo Snerdley, the guy who he had been his producer for a long time, right? And they were just talking, and they were telling the story of when Rush came in and told everyone that he had cancer, where it was, how bad it was, what the plans were. And while I'm sitting there, I'm kind of going through the catharsis of hearing this story, I feel very much in my spirit to look at the date that he actually passes. For those of you who have known me for a while, you know that I've written on prophecy a lot. In fact, that's really my more public-facing persona evolved because I wrote about prophecy. Unfortunately, the channel is so young, it won't let me put links to everything, but we'll do a video on my view of Revelation 12 and all of that at a future date. And one of the things that I'm big on is comparing things with events with the Hebrew calendar. It's a long-standing tradition within both rabbinic traditions and modern sort of charismatic prophetic teachers to look at the Hebrew calendar, what verses are read giving a given period, the date that falls in the calendar, does it coincide with any specific events, as a way of understanding not just biblical prophecy first and foremost, but then how God communicates to us often, right? Is that things that we will see as coincidences are often God trying to give us a context for what's happening. So I'm sitting there and I feel I need to look this up. So I pull it up. He passes on February 17 of 2021. And on the Hebrew calendar, that's the 5th of Adar. And at first I didn't see anything on that date. So I'm like, okay, cool. Nothing happened that day. We're out, right? But I was kind of scrolling, like, well, what else happened around that time? Because I'm waiting for things to for my food to get brought out to me. So I'm like, okay, well, I'm start flipping through, and it turns out that depending on who you read, the general accepted date for Moses' death is the 7th of Adar. Now, that's not in scripture, just real quick, for people who may not know. The date of Moses' passing is not listed anywhere in scripture. However, the assumption is that It's the 10th of Nisan, not Nissan, but like the car, but Nisan. when Joshua is given the order to go into the Levant, right, and begin the crusade to cleanse it and to bring Israel into its nation. We know that happens after his death, and most rabbinical scholars believe that Moses passed 30 days before that, which is the 7th, which is where we get the date 7th of Adar. There are others who believe he actually does pass on the 5th of Adar. Others believe that the 5th of Adar is when Moses gives, sort of hands the reins over to Joshua. I like to go with the majority, belief on a thing when it's in this prophetic realm. Like, what is the most commonly held accepted date? And that is the 7th of Adar for Moses' passing. And I noticed this and I think, man, that's really weird. That's a little too close for coincidence. And I realized that Rush Limbaugh started his national, or it goes sort of national in 88, but the show starts in 84, right? When he starts doing his show. And he passes about 3 years shy of his 40th anniversary, right? Obviously, we know 40 years in the desert with Moses. We know that Moses was 40 when he kills the Egyptian. He's in the desert for 40 years before he's called to go save Israel. The number 40 is very, very big within Moses. And so my brain won't let this go. There's too many coincidences for this. And you may say, now, normally, again, if those of you who've read my work in prophecy, you're like, but Jason, it has to be on the day. Everything has to be 100% spot on, right? And that is for interpreting biblical prophecy, yes. However, these sort of prophetic messages can be a lot more generalized. And the fact that Rush's dates don't line up perfectly with Moses, it only means it can be interpreted that it's just he's less than, right? That God's not saying he was Moses, but rather this is a context to understand him in. And that's when it sort of occurred to me, and I realized what is being said. When Moses passes, this is when Joshua takes Israel into the Levant. This is when we get Jericho. This is where we get the destruction of these Nephilim tribes in the actual fight for Israel. It happens after Moses passes because the previous generation was not up to the task. They lacked the faith to take the Levant. The 12 spies, they go in. Only 2 come out saying, we can do this. The other 10 said, we can't. The giants are too big. They're too powerful for us. The previous generation had to die off before they could go in. It needed that younger generation to say, we can do this. They were the ones who were ready to go into Israel. And that's when I sort of realized my perspective is the reason Rush dies on that day is the message that says it is now time to start the fight. Not in a literal sense where it's like, okay, it's time to get violent. No. Everything's spiritual. But it is time to resist. It is time to, instead of lay down and take it, it is time to move forward and take the promised land, to fight back, to resist, to take these cities and fight these giants that are too big to fight, according to the previous generations. That's why I look at the millennials and even Gen Z and the younger generations and say, don't laugh at them. They're the ones prepared for this time. That's why I look at things like Elon Musk and everyone's like, but he's not perfect. He doesn't need to be. Rahab wasn't perfect. She wasn't necessarily living, she was a prostitute, but she helped. She gave access that ultimately leads to the destruction of Jericho. And I think this is the number one reason the previous generations weren't prepared for this time is because they sort of had this perspective of, well, God's going to do it. I don't have to do anything. Right? He's just going to hand it over to us. That's not how this works.
I guess they
God
got too
gave.
used to all that manna and quail for 40 years, and
Exact.
they're
No,
like they got soft. Yeah.
100%. Yes, 100%. They wanted everything given to them. In our previous generation, they're like, no, no, God will just give it to us. That's not how this works. God will he'll hand over the land of Israel back to its rightful owners, but you got to fight for it. You got to have a spine. You got to get in there and get dirty. Previous generation wasn't willing to do that. And that's where we're at. That is my number, sort of my message, and my takeaway is what Russia's passing means it's time for every single person to engage in this warfare, to engage in confronting the culture and say, no, you don't get to do this stuff anymore. You don't get to lie to the people. You don't get to steal from the people. You don't get to indoctrinate our children with insanity. You don't get to destroy our world because it suits some other person's globalist agenda. It's no longer time for us to sit back and try to be the nice guy. And it's not up for a leader to come and lead us and take we have to be the ones in the field. We have to resist. It's time to get off your ass and do something. Working a little blue today. So that is what I call the Rush Limbaugh prophecy, is that it was a message from God telling us, hey, it's time to get up and fight. Now is the time. And this younger generation is the one that's going to help lead this, because what Rush did was provide that 40 years, metaphorically speaking, that 40 years of context. He showed everyone what it was like to fight. He allowed for there to be a changing of minds, a conversation about ideas. He allowed for that. Now it's time to take those thoughts, those ideas, and move into the future.
So I never listened to Rush Limbaugh. I never had
Yeah.
the chance, or just had to. I mean, I had no opinions of him either way, because I don't
Yeah.
consider myself a conservative nor a liberal. I just never got the opportunity to listen to him. So
Yeah.
give me a little breakdown of, like, I don't know, his views, or
Okay.
compared to some other, I guess, people who be considered like an Alex Jones. Like, how does he compare to like an Alex Jones?
So, okay, now that is a really good question. And to understand that, we kind of need to take a step back 40 years, right, to the early 80s. Again, you and I, we're the same age. We're born in 1980.
Mhm.
Let's be honest, our cultural understanding of things beyond Transformers and GI Joes starts close to the 88, 89, 90 area, right?
Mhm.
Before Rush Limbaugh, there was the talk radio genre itself was dead, right? It just didn't exist really beyond local cooking shows and stuff like that, and gardening shows, things of that nature. He revitalized that entire genre, but what he was it was the first time in mass media that someone was really talking about conservative views. Until then, you had ABC, NBC, CBS, right? You had your Dan Rathers, uh, and all these other people who we now know, and it's now common knowledge, were essentially controlled by the government, right? Everyone's like, oh, why can't we get back to where we were with these with mass media where everyone agreed on things? Well, because we were being lied to the entire time. It was always manipulated. We just didn't know it. So he was the first person to push back on that ideology
Hmm.
and create sort of that idea. Even now, he wasn't the first conservative by any stretch of the imagination. You had William Buckley, who was started National Review. He was on PBS firing lines, and Phyllis Schlafly. There were a lot of people in that space, but he's the first one to sort of talk to the average person and convey what we now consider conservative values. And that's what he did. Now, how does he compare to someone like, say, Alex Jones? Where Alex Jones is essentially more in the conspiracy theory space. Although,
Mhm.
let's be honest, let's compare records with him against CNN. Let's see who gets it right more often than not. Right? Rush
Mhm.
was about larger ideas. Right? He was about explaining conservative thought. I've used this metaphor a couple times. Honestly, over the last 2 days, where America was 40 years ago, essentially was there. We have an entire generation of people, the boomers, who they knew the fence was important, but they didn't know why the fence was there. Right? This is sort of the situation America found itself in. It's like they knew that there was sort of these traditional American values, and the average person said, I like these traditional American values. They just didn't know what they were for. They couldn't explain why they were important. Why was capitalism important versus socialism? Why is a stable nuclear family important? These issues, small government versus a large federalized government. These ideas most people agreed with, but they couldn't explain why. That's what Rush was doing. He was explaining this larger conservative philosophy and making it accessible for most people. And this is one of those things where, because we had Rush for basically 40 years, and it's hard to really describe his impact until you look at voting patterns and how they change. Right now, everyone's like, "Oh, of course the South is a Republican stronghold," right? Everyone forgets Jimmy Carter won the South. Bill Clinton won the South. George W. Bush was the first Republican governor in Texas history. And that happens in the 90s. The South doesn't become conservative until the 90s. And what happened was, again, William Buckley, yes, absolutely. But he's very much that Northeastern sort of yes, yes, let us talk economic theory, right? He's, again, love William F. Buckley. He's a great guy, but he wasn't talking to the average person. Whereas Rush was on your radio, where blue collar people could listen to him, and he spoke the blue collar language. He wasn't. It wasn't that he wasn't erudite, but he had a way of talking to the average person, and people were being won over. And he would bring on people like Walter Williams to guest host for him. If you don't know who Walter Williams is or was, unfortunately, he passed just a few years ago. He was one of literally, it was him and Thomas Sowell. They used to joke that Walter Williams and Thomas Sowell used to joke that they couldn't fly in planes together, because if it crashed, there would be no more black conservatives in the public space. It was him and it was Thomas Sowell, and that was it. Rush Limbaugh introduced Walter Williams, who was a black economist, and Thomas Sowell, again, another black, brilliant. I mean, honestly, I'll tell you that as far as I'm concerned, Thomas Sowell's the most important philosopher of the late 20th and early 21st centuries, period, end of story. But they were economists. But he would bring him on to guest host. He would have Thomas Sowell on to talk about economics and how these things worked, and to explain things. You could argue in a lot of ways Rush was even breaking down racial barriers in the conservative movement, showing that it was okay for minorities to engage, because until then, no one was saying that it was, there was that larger sort of liberal globalist environment that determined how most people saw things. And Rush was about the bigger picture. So again, specifically, how does he differ from someone like, say, Alex Jones? He wasn't getting into the conspiracy theories or anything like that. He was more about the larger philosophical aspect of what we would call conservatism, and explaining that to the average person.
So you would say he was probably better at selling conservatism versus someone like Alex Jones, who was more likely to be preaching to the choir.
Right. Yes. Yes. Exactly. Yeah.
Mhm.
And again, Alex Jones is, serves a purpose, and, good for him, but he wasn't the evangelist in the person to do the apologetics of conservatism. But in a lot of ways, he was having to help Americans understand why those fences were important. Again, those traditional American values. Why were they important? He was more about the exploration of the philosophy.
And you don't really get too much of Alex Jones's, because I've learned. See, I haven't listened to any of Rush Limbaugh, but I've
Yeah.
listened to a bit of Alex Jones because of Joe Rogan.
Yeah.
And one of the things I've noticed is you don't really get too much of his social views.
Right.
It's more, you don't hear his thoughts on like gay marriage or abortion or things like that, right? He's more talking about the hidden secret government that's, and the world's elite, right? That's what he's
Correct.
talking about.
Yeah,
So him
exactly.
talking about that, it shouldn't just be, that's not like conservatism. It's just
No.
that he sees these liberal leaders as like, like villains essentially,
Exactly. No,
right?
that. Yeah, exactly. That
But
would be the
just seeing
difference.
them as villains doesn't mean you're conservative,
Correct.
right?
No,
So
exactly.
yeah. Whereas I guess, so from what I'm gathering of what you're talking about with Rush Limbaugh, he's more like conservatism as a philosophy and as a viewpoint, not so
Yes.
much on going after, I'm not just on this team. I'm not just on team A because I hate team B. Like I really
Correct.
believe in team A.
Right. It
Right.
was,
Yeah.
let's explain why Team A is the right team to be on. In fact, he's the one who created the idea of the concept of neoconservatism, which he lovingly dubbed a liberal who's been mugged by reality. He was the one who coined the term rhino, meaning Republican in name only, saying no, there is that in many ways he actually forced the Republican Party into having a true into really forcing this conservative ideology into the Republican Party. Because until then it really didn't. It was. I'm trying to explain. I'm trying to find a way to explain, because our politics are so different today than they were 40 years ago.
Oh yeah.
And again, the easiest way to explain this is I grew up in Dallas, Texas, and it's still very much a heavily Democrat area. Now the areas around are more Republican, but Texas was run by Democrats until the 90s. And in many ways, he helped sort of he really helped sort of create the ideology that allowed people to say, I'm going to go this way and I'm going to go this way. Right? He sort of allowed people to start sorting into the idea where the Republican and Democrat Party kind of meant something. Now, obviously, in current politics, we know that the establishment of both parties are part of the uniparty, right? But that's the thing, is everyone was a part of the uniparty 40 years ago. Now we can now see that that's a thing because of what Rush did. Because now people have an ideological understanding of what people are doing and why. So that allows us to understand, oh, okay, this is why people are doing what they're doing. It allows us to see it more clearly.
Yeah, it's a one-party system, folks, if you haven't figured that out by now.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm surprised more people don't know that.
Well, again, most people still listen to mainstream media as if it's real.
Yeah. I mean, I still watch mainstream media. Like, I'll go on CNN, but that's, because I like to laugh in the morning when I eat my breakfast.
Yes.
And have my
And you're a
morning
bit of a
coffee.
masochist anyway.
Yeah, I like that's like my morning comedy.
Mm-hmm.
You ever just open up like mainstream news and just laugh? You got to laugh sometimes at it.
Oh, you have to. No, you
Yeah,
have
I mean,
to.
obviously not the dark, tragic stuff, but
Yeah. No, I get it. No, I know exactly what you're saying. And that's, again, prior to Rush, there was ABC, NBC, CBS, and yes, CNN was around at that point as well. But that was it. There was no one pushing back. If Rush hadn't been here, there would be no one would understand what's happening or why. And we would all think, oh, well, just everyone's telling us the truth here. He allowed for the stratification of ideologies so that we could even understand that there was a difference and why things are happening the way they are. The fact that a lot of people don't believe it or understand it is irrelevant. He allowed for that definition.
Okay, so I brought up Alex Jones earlier.
Yeah.
Right, comparing, contrasting Rush Limbaugh and Alex Jones. I'm going to bring up another name, and you tell me the difference, okay?
Sure.
Rush Limbaugh and Tucker Carlson.
Tucker Carlson is so okay. That's really interesting. So I mentioned. Oh, I just forgot his name. The guy who started National Review. Northeastern. I'll remember his name later. I
Started
can't.
with a W, I think.
Yeah, the problem is now I just see Walter Williams in my head now, and that's not who I'm talking. Anyway, it's irrelevant. In many ways, Tucker Carlson starts off as a softer, more Washington-friendly version of Rush Limbaugh, right? Where Rush is more about calling people on the carpet. Tucker starts off as someone who wants to have William Buckley. William Buckley, that's who it is. He's sort of in the William Buckley vein. Okay, when he starts off, he goes on fire, like he's on PBS. He's wearing a bow tie, and you could argue he wasn't there to be the conservative that gets beat up by the liberal, but that was essentially his role. Over the last few years, though, and it started, and he claims it started around 2001, because he's like, wait, this doesn't seem to match up, because he comes from Washington, like his family is came out of that bubble. He had the idea that a lot of people had growing up, again, that very boomer thought
so
of
Tucker Carlson was more of like a Washington insider dude. Like he was like
yeah,
familiar with the
absolutely.
DC culture and everything. Okay.
Yeah, and so he had this idea that everyone was on the same team. They just disagreed on how to get there, right? Like we all want to get to Dairy Queen, but we're disagreeing on how to get there, and we can have conversations, but we're all essentially going the same direction. Over the last few years, though, again, in many ways, because of Rush and his impact on the culture, he started to realize that's not what's happening here. So, in many ways, the modern Tucker, the Tucker of just before, really post-Trump, right? So, not too far away from, it really was Trump that pushed Tucker in more past where Rush was. So, Rush, now you could argue that Tucker is Rush Limbaugh with a dash of Alex Jones thrown in. Where, yeah, Tucker's going to talk about the big ideas, but he's also going to show you how you're getting screwed and how you've been lied to. So old Tucker was sort of Rush Limbaugh light, and modern Tucker is Rush plus backbone with some Alex Jones sprinkled in.
How about Bill O'Reilly?
I'm gonna cheese off some people. Bill O'Reilly was always a knockoff. He was the great value version of Rush Limbaugh. He took Rush's okay, and Sean Hannity, all of them, right? Literally everyone else. They're knockoffs of Rush Limbaugh. They all went one way or the other with it, where Bill O'Reilly's like, I'm going to have the over-the-top personality, but they're all just knockoffs. Like they were all entertainers who are just, I'm going to get a lot of hate for this. Sean Hannity, and you'll get what I'm about to say. Sean Hannity is to Rush what Family Guy is to The Simpsons.
Ooh.
If Rush hasn't said it or thought it or done it, Hannity can't come up with it.
Okay.
Yeah. Essentially, they're all great. With except, you could argue Greg Gutfeld's a little different because he is more
how
of a
about
comedian.
How about this?
But yeah,
Sean
they're all
Hannity
great
to Rush is Lobo to Wolverine.
Yes. Again, we're the only two people getting these references.
Oh, come on. There's got to be some other comic book fans out there who watch this.
I'm certain that there's a few. I'm just saying.
Oh, man.
I'm just saying we probably went over several people's heads with that one, but that's not a bad. Yeah, it's not a bad idea. Although I'd argue Lobo's even more original than, say, Sean Hannity is.
Okay, so I want to circle it back to the whole prophecy idea, right? Because you were kind of, I guess, comparing the idea of Rush and Moses, right?
Right.
So what are some other parallels have you seen between Rush and Moses, if any?
So this is where I think it's very easy, and this is where I think a lot of people get
Mhm.
in the prophetic realm get lost, right? They say, "Oh, okay, hold on, there's something here," and then they work real hard to try and fit people into boxes, right?
Mhm.
And the thing is, unless we're talking about again specifically biblical prophecy, where it's 100%, you have to understand that these are more generic or generalized understandings. It's to give us context to know what's happening, what's God doing, what's He trying to tell us, right? But to your point, again, He's. I would say the generalized collection is He's the one who rallies the nation together, right? He rallies the Hebrew people and brings in the strangers. It wasn't just the Hebrews who left Egypt. They brought Egyptians with them
Mm.
because they're like, we want to be with you. We want to follow your God. And he governs over them over those 40 years of wandering to allow them to become the Israel that can take the promised land, where they're working out the first 5 books of what we'd call the Pentateuch,
Mhm.
where they're working these thoughts and ideas out, their strategies, their understanding of God, right? That all happens in that 40-year period. That's what Rush allowed the conservative movement to do. Is he gained converts and allowed the ideology to communicate, and for
Mm.
people to understand, hold on, maybe I am a conservative. Like, again, most people, again, a lot of the boomers, they knew those fences were important, but they didn't understand why. They didn't know that that's what they made them. They didn't have the language for it. That's what Rush allowed people to. They heard and like, hey, this guy doesn't sound crazy. This is what I believe. In fact, he was one of the things he said a lot. He goes, I'm not saying, he says, they would say he was this Pied Piper. He goes, I'm not a Pied Piper. I'm not converting you because I'm saying something new. You just understand that I'm saying what you already believe, and I'm giving it a voice. That's why he was in many ways very, very unifying. It was the first time someone had come out and explained these ideas and put them into uh and where the rubber meets the road kind of stuff, so that people understood what they actually were. Because prior to him, there was no Fox News, there was no conservative voice in the mainstream that
Mm.
people could hear and understand. Right? It wasn't that there weren't voices, but they were very limited and very narrow. He brought it together and allowed that philosophy, again, by having people like Thomas Sowell and Walter Williams come on and talk about conservative economics
And I
and
guess
why it
Moses
was
kind
better.
of did the same thing too with his
Yes.
people.
Yeah.
You know,
I
one
mean,
one thing I was thinking that they both had in common: the people who
mhm,
didn't like them both wished that they would just shut up. You
yes.
know, there are all the Rush haters would be like, "Man, I wish that guy would just shut up," right?
No,
And the
that is
people
exactly it.
in Moses'
Hmm.
day, when they're like, when he's all, when he comes back down from the mountain and everyone's off enjoying their golden bowls, and then here comes
Yes.
Moses. He's like, "Hey guys, what are you doing?" And everyone's just like, "Oh
Hmm.
man, that guy again. Oh
No,
man, I
you're
wish he would have just
100%
stayed on
correct.
top of his mountain." You know?
Yeah, no, yes, that's a great parallel also. That, yeah, and again, you could probably force more parallels, and I would even go so far, because a lot of people say, but Rush had problems with drugs later on in life and all, and he wasn't perfect. He got divorced. Great. You know who wasn't perfect? Moses.
Yeah, Moses killed a dude.
He killed it. Yeah,
Yeah.
Moses was a murderer. Moses was also a coward. He didn't want to go before Pharaoh. That's the entire story of him at the burning bush, is him trying to get out of it. In fact, this is one of those things where you usually get very, very wrong in movies. Aaron is the one who, like, Moses is there, but Aaron is the one who talks to the Pharaoh. We always say, oh, Moses is standing. No, it's Aaron.
With the
Moses is
stick
often
that
trying to
turns to
get out
snakes.
of
Yeah.
doing this. Yeah. Moses was not perfect. No, Rush wasn't perfect because he was human. But he was someone who was willing to stand up, someone who was willing to take those slings and arrows. He learned how to take those slings and arrows. He was a man who lived in a great deal of back pain. And for people who do not understand back pain, I understand back pain. If you don't understand back pain, you don't understand what happened to him. but he never stopped fighting. When he lost his hearing, when he, again, with the chronic back pain, he never stopped fighting. His concern was for the country and for this ideology. Now, real quick, I want to double back for just a quick second. Let me finish that one thought. And that is where Moses never stops fighting for Israel. Right? That's the thing. He never stops because he saves Israel from God. He stands in the gap for Israel because God's like, I gave him the law. We come down and we see, and they're all worshiping these golden calves. I'm going to start over with you, Moses. And Moses stands in that gap. Again, Moses never stops fighting for Israel. Rush never stopped fighting for America and for conservatism. But going back to that Alex Jones thing for just a quick second, Rush told one story. Like I said, he was the one who created the idea of the rhino, right? And there was one story he told a lot. And people who grew up listening to him and listened to him, particularly those last 20 years, they'll recognize this story. He told it quite often, but I think he often was trying to tell us things without going full Alex Jones. But he was telling us that there was a uniparty. He was telling us that a lot of these people aren't who we think they are. And the story was that there was when he was very fresh and new on the scene, he got invited to one of these because that's the other side, one of these Northeast Republican parties. And he talked about how all these rich, wealthy Republicans were coming to him saying, Rush, we love you, but you need to get these crazy Christians to stop talking about abortion. It's killing us. We're never going to get, political power if they're talking about abortion. And Rush is like, what are you talking about? Like, this is this stuff matters, and it matters to the people who are fighting for you. We need to respect that. That's a big deal. He was anti-abortion, obviously, but he told that story often. And I think a lot of people missed why he told that story. He was telling us a lot of these elites in the Republican Party, they aren't what you think they are, right? He was about growing conservatism, but he was also about trying to correct conservatism in a lot of ways, because it had been a very Northeastern sort of philosophy. And that's what he was doing, is he was bringing in the Christians and the blue collars. He was like, let's not make, again, going back 40 years, it's kind of hard to imagine how things were, but yes, Christians tended to be Republican, sort of. Like, it really wasn't as clear cut as it is today, but it was very much sort of where the Christians were just the lapdogs. They just voted Republicans. That's because they would put on a show. He was trying to force the Republican Party to actually do what Christians wanted them to do. Right? That's what the fight was. It was like, no, let's not. And so he was trying to tell us these things. He also made, right after Obama was voted in, and I remember it because it struck me as odd the way he phrased it. And I think he was sort of caught mid-thought, and he realized where he was going. He's like, I can't say that on the radio. And it wasn't anything about Obama. He's like, this is not how the Democrats work. Because Obama came out of nowhere, right? And he usurps Hillary Clinton. And he was sitting there thinking, and he just realized something's weird. This isn't how they work. He used to say, I know the liberals better than I know my own glorious naked body, right? And something's wrong here. This is not how they operate, right? This is not their standard modus operandi. So he was really sort of taken aback by him. It wasn't, everyone's like, oh, it's because Rush was a racist. He didn't like, no. Anyone who thinks Rush is a racist is an idiot and wasn't paying attention, right? They were just listening to the mainstream media. He recognized that Obama wasn't what he was presented as, that there was something else going on. This is where maybe the Alex Jones stuff he probably knew a lot more of the Alex Jones stuff than he let on. That he was trying, that he knew he couldn't tell he couldn't tell this stuff to his audience at the time because they weren't ready for it. The uniparty stuff, right? He had to allow for people to catch up to these ideas that maybe our politics isn't as direct or as influenced by the people of this nation as we would like to think it is, right? He was getting those ideas out there that now we can have people say, hey, hold on, this isn't making sense here, right? Where Tucker can come out and say, what happened with Nixon, it seems like there's a lot more FBI and CIA involvement from the get-go, that maybe this whole thing was a scam. People wouldn't have even heard that 15 years ago or 10 years ago, right? In many ways, he was laying the foundation for this awakening where people realize, oh, hey, our government's scamming us. So, yeah, he wasn't an Alex Jones, but he allowed for people to, a lot of people who called Alex Jones nuts 10 years ago are starting to listen to Alex Jones. Rush kind of laid that foundation for them to even be able to understand it.
Yeah. A lot of people are listening to Alex Jones these days.
Yeah. Well, and it is one of those things where, again, it's hard to understand the societal change while you're going through it, right? You kind of have to take that step back and say, well, where was everyone 40 years ago? Rush moved this country in ways that we still don't even fully understand, because he allowed for that conversation to occur, for conservatives to find a voice and explore those ideas. And all the hate, all the, the stuff that people laugh at now, they're like, oh, Cleopatra, right? All the hate that's out there for people like, hey, Cleopatra, why are you blackwashing Cleopatra? He got all of that in the 80s. They called him racist, bigot, homophobe, anti-woman. They called him everything under the sun because he was the first person to stand up against these ideas. He was the first person to do it. So everything that we're getting called today, he was called far worse, far earlier. And he's the one who sort of taught a lot of the modern conservative movement, where that is a badge of pride. If you get canceled, that's a badge of pride. When YouTube's like, no, we got to shut you down, that's a badge of pride. He sort of pioneered that idea of saying, no. You want to throw down? Let's throw down. All of that comes from him saying that because one of the problems, again, in the older conservative generation was we have to be nice. We have to be respectful. Rush was really one of the first people to say, no, call them names. Show them that they're wrong. He was the first person to sort of pioneer that idea. So you'd probably love him if he was still around. You'd be like, nah, this Rush Limbaugh guy's pretty cool.
Maybe, man. Maybe.
Yeah.
Okay. Quick question.
Sure.
In this whole analogy of Rush and Moses, right?
Mm-hmm.
If Rush is like Moses, then who would you think is our Joshua?
I knew you were going to go there because that's where my brain went to, right? And this is where I'm going to say I think it's worth not overextending the metaphor. Does that make sense?
I have a nomination for Joshua.
Okay.
Jason McLean.
I am too pretty to be a Joshua.
I think you're the one, if Rush is the,
Okay.
You're going to be the one that brings down the walls of Jericho, baby.
Trust me, that's not it. I mean, look at the numbers on our show. I'm not a Joshua. I mean, honestly, it's probably someone like Dan Bongino or even possibly Tucker. But I think, again, for me, it's not about trying to say, well, then who's the next Joshua? My thing is, what is the movement? It's about it's about taking the Levant. That means that every single person watching this has the opportunity to make the world a better place and to fight. And that is, in fact, your obligation to fight. And we need to look at the younger generation and say, no, you need to come along with us. Let's show you why these things were good. and let you fight for them, and let's actually change things. That's where the metaphor goes for me. That being said, who knows how time rolls out?
I could see you building an army, Jason McLean. Just give it a couple years.
Sexy
It'll
army.
come. It'll come.
Well, I'm a little busy fighting, to get Christians to actually believe their Bible. Looking at you, evangelicals.
How about read your Bible first? How about
Yeah,
that?
actually read your Bible
Just
first, and
read
then
it.
we'll
Can you
talk
just
about it.
read it? I mean, it's not that hard to. It's a book, okay? Come on, just
Yeah.
read it.
Yeah, that's what, we'll do a show on that too, because
Yeah.
I think that's one of my big pet peeves. It's like, well, maybe the reason you're not really reading it is because you don't believe it. Like I said, that's a conversation for another time.
I think they're just too lazy. I think people are just lazy. I think people are just allergic to reading. Honestly, a lot of them.
Well, you're not wrong.
Yeah.
You're not wrong there. Well, Donnie, as always, I appreciate you standing in and asking these questions. Do you have any last minute questions before we go?
No, I think we're good. Oh, last question.
Okay.
How do you think Rush Limbaugh would have done in like a Bigfoot podcast?
I think the man understood how to tell a story and how to talk to the people. I think he would have done fabulously.
I think the ultimate podcast in heaven would be like Rush Limbaugh versus like Art Bell in like a conversation. So you see how that conversation unfolds. Art Bell's going to be like, "Did you have any experiences, Rush?" And Rush would be like, "You know what? I did have that one time." And then he goes into reptilians, and then Rush will be like, "You know what? I think reptilians might be real. I think I've seen some." And then they get really into it. Man, the world missed out on an opportunity right there, man. That would have been like the most epic like podcast radio interview ever.
Yes.
Oh well.
No, I agree. So there you go.
I actually grew up on Howard Stern.
Right.
So as someone who grew up on Howard Stern, he would often talk about Rush Limbaugh. I couldn't even tell if they liked each other or not.
No. As near as I could tell, as far as I know, let me rephrase it that way. I don't think they liked each other because in many ways, Howard Stern, because he called himself the king of all media.
Mm-hmm.
No, Rush beat him like a redheaded stepchild in the ratings.
But I feel like there was a time like later on in Howard's career where he did start becoming more like, I don't know, conservative in his views and more like anti-liberal. And then like some of his kind of views started lining up more so as he got older.
I think what happened with him, although he's a shill, like straight up, but I think he's like what happened with Piers Morgan and Bill Maher. It isn't that they got more conservative, it's that the liberals got crazier. And they went so far to the left that they look semi-conservative in relation to the liberals.
Yeah.
And now that being said, even with Bill Maher and Piers Morgan, though, you can also say, well, that is probably true. That's not that they've became conservative, just that they're more.
They were more like center left, but
they were always center left.
Moved more and more left. They were like, oh, I guess we're right now. You know?
Yeah, but there are a few things where they've moved maybe slightly to the right, but I think it's not they moved in so much as they understood the game that was being played, and they're like, oh, okay, this is not cool.
Yeah.
Right, because they haven't moved that far to the right. Mostly it's by comparison, but I think they've also sort of woken up to what's happening on the left, and they're like, "Oh, this is not what we want at all." Yeah. Right? It's more understanding that the side that they were for is not the side they thought it was. Waking up to the lie, and again, that's what Rush allowed to happen by creating the conservative space and allowing the ideas to germinate and culminate. It's now allowed us to say, okay, well, if this is black and this is white and this is gray, we can see those gradations more clearly. And so as the dark gets darker and keeps moving towards black, we're more able to see that. And like, I don't want a part of that. They could pretend it was gray for the longest time, but it keeps moving towards black, and like, this is not kosher, right? So it changed their direction.
I could definitely see that happening.
Well, in that case, Thank you, Donnie. Again, great show as always.
Man, I was about to launch into my own views on the left and the right, but that is a conversation for another time.
It is. No, because now that we've had this conversation, now we can have the Donnie Cho view of reality.
Oh, wait till I unload. Okay, yeah.
Yeah, we'll wait for another 20 or 30 subscribers, and then we'll do that.
All right, we'll do that.
So there you go. You need to share this show out. Get your friends
Mhm.
to like, follow, and subscribe so that Donnie Cho can go full politics.
Oh,
And
we
we can.
doing politics, baby.
Oh yeah. Well, and so long story. Okay, real quick. I actually did do a show called Not Playing Politics under a pseudonym because the guy who did it with me was still active military. Truth be told, I think we would notice that things are different from what we think they are. I think a lot of people are trapped in this idea of right, left, or Republican, Democrat. They don't understand the game that's actually being played. So I think that it would be a lot more interesting. This conversation is going to be a lot more interesting than people realize. But we can only do that if we hit another 20 subscribers. So get this show out there. Get your family members to sign up. Let's get this thing watched because we need the Jello wrestling match that's going to be Donnie Cho versus Jason McLean on politics. Yes, we do.
Actually, we kind of mostly agree on everything, though. Like our
don't say that. Oh, we need them to think it's going to be a knockdown drag.
I'll pretend. Okay, I can pretend.
Yeah, like wrestling, man. Like, yeah.
Oh, devil's advocate. Oh, we could do that.
There you go.
There we go.
There you go. It's like he's not even paying attention sometimes, people. I swear. Thank you for watching. We'll catch y'all next time.
Bye.
Thank you for watching. Share us out, like, follow, and subscribe for more.